Thank you very much. It's so great to be back in Utah. And, I rarely get standing ovations in the United States Senate, so I'm honored to have one here, and very pleased to be in the presence of so many familiar faces, a lot of people that I have known and admired for a long time, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here. We live in a difficult time, that is to some extent chronicled in the book that I've distributed to each of you. I'm sure that they're all well worn by now, but it makes a great paperweight. It makes a great anchor in the event that a large storm comes in or anything like that. But hopefully it can give you something of a flavor for what I do from day to day, what I've been working on over the last year. And I'd like to talk to you for just a few minutes about some of the highlights, and then we'll, if you'd like, and with the speaker's permission, I'll open up the floor to questions after that. I've been focusing a lot of my efforts in the last year on building consensus behind the idea that we do have something of an economic opportunity crisis in America. Not in the same way that other countries face it, but in the sense that we as Americans have always lived in a land of opportunity. This is a place, a rather unique place, a special place, where a person could be born in poverty and die comfortable or well off. This is a place where even most wealthy families can remember a time when their own family was poor. And that's because of our free market and our strong institutions, our strong voluntary institutions of civil society. Those things facilitate upward mobility, and these things make it possible for someone who's born poor to die wealthy. Well, we see that for the first time in American history, that trend is suffering. That trend isn't continuing as it has in the past. And we see something of an economic opportunity crisis, not relative to other countries, but relative to our own history. And this crisis manifests itself at three different levels on the economic ladder. It manifests itself in the form of insecurity and immobility among the poor, those who are trying to work hard and provide for their families but aren't quite making it. In the form of a certain degree of insecurity among the middle class, those who work hard and are able to provide for the basic needs of their family. But they find that no sooner have they achieved a little extra income, when that does happen, then they quickly discover that a lot of that extra income has been gobbled up by a combination of taxes, inflation, and increased prices that are the product of excessive government intervention in our economy. Excessive government regulation, keeping in mind that our federal regulations currently cost Americans about $2 trillion a year. That's the annual compliance cost. We tend to think of those costs as being borne only by large, wealthy corporations, but the fact is that the costs of that compliance get passed downstream. Hardworking Americans pay more for goods and for services as a result of these regulations. To put that in perspective, that's starting to come close to what we pay in income tax, just our regulatory compliance costs. So we've got this immobility among the poor, we've got insecurity among the middle class, and then at the top of the economic ladder, we have something really nasty, cronyist privilege at the top, where government policies themselves will artificially prop up those who have achieved the highest degree of economic success, insulating them from competition, sometimes through direct subsidies, sometimes through regulations that serve as effective barriers on entry, making it harder and harder for others who have not yet ascended to that height on the ladder to work their way up. We've got to do better, and there are things that we can do, things that we must do, and that we will do in order to get there. That's why I've been putting together a reform agenda, a conservative reform agenda that has as its focus restoring and enabling economic mobility, restoring the vitality of our free markets and our voluntary institutions of civil society. As we do this together, we will find that everyone, regardless of their station in life, regardless of whether they were born poor or rich, will be able to work for their family and provide for the needs of their family and find success in life. This is, after all, what government is all about. As Abraham Lincoln put it in an address to Congress in 1861, it's the job of government to clear the paths of laudable pursuit by lifting artificial barriers removing artificial weights that hinder human beings in their progress. In many instances, those barriers, those weights, those impediments are put in place by government itself. It's our job to remove them. Now, there's an awful lot of that removing that needs to be done at the federal level because we put a lot of those barriers in place. And I'm working with Republicans and with Democrats to do precisely that. I've got a measure to reform our tax code, to simplify it and to eliminate the marriage tax penalty and the parent tax penalty, replacing our current complicated system with a two-rate system, one under which nearly all Americans would pay under a simplified rate of 15%. I've got another one that's designed to make higher education more available and more affordable to more Americans and to increase the quality at the same time by giving the states the option of creating an alternative accreditation regime. With that accreditation, we could have more players in the higher education market, more people eligible to participate in Title IV funding programs for higher education. With increased competition comes improvements in quality and will come improvements as far as price as well. Working on a number of other measures that deal with various things that are of concern to Americans. I'm working on a bill with Pat Leahy, who's my very liberal Democratic colleague from Vermont. He and I don't agree on everything, but we do agree on a number of things, including the fact that the government has no business snooping through your private correspondence. We've introduced legislation to get rid of an obscure, little-known, but very dangerous loophole in federal law, one that allows the government, technically speaking, to peer into the contents of your email once your email has ripened to the tender age of 180 days old. I'm working with several of my other Democratic colleagues, including Ron Wyden from Oregon and including Tom Udall from New Mexico, on legislation to restrict the ability of the NSA to monitor the activity of American citizens without a court order. Little by little, we can get there. Little by little, we can get to the point where the federal government isn't controlling every aspect of our lives. But I need your help to do it. Whether you're a Republican or whether you're a Democrat, as state legislators, I'm confident that you can appreciate the fact that the best kind of government often occurs at the state and local level. Most people, more people, could get more of the kind of government they want if more of the government that they want were actually subject to decision-making at the state and at the local level. So whether you're a liberal or whether you're a conservative, this ought to be appealing to you, this idea that we ought not make the states the de facto political subdivisions of the federal government. We ought not allow for federal spending to influence every aspect of state decision-making. And we're moving more and more in that direction every single day. So I'd like to invite all of you to join me in this cause, to restore the economic opportunity society that America is and that it can become once again, and to do so by restoring those founding-era principles that have made our country great, that have allowed for government to occur at the local level. But to do that, we've got to work together, and we've got to focus on lifting those barriers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. We do have a few questions. So if you'll, Representative McKay.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Senator Lee, I appreciate your leadership on several issues that I care about. One that was somewhat difficult for the state to balance is the Farm Bill that recently passed both the House and the Senate. And included in there was PILT funding. And I know that there are several in the state, around the state, that were concerned about your vote specifically compared to the rest of the delegation saying they were in favor of the bill. Help me understand, or help me answer my constituents and those who would like to know your answer to how you voted and how that really impacts and benefits Utah.
Sure. First of all, let me speak for a moment about PILT, and then I'll explain my vote on the Farm Bill as it relates to that. PILT is extraordinarily important to the state of Utah. As you know, 2/3 of our land is owned by the federal government. As a result of that fact, we're told by the federal government that we can't tax that land. Now, in our state, it's counties that impose property taxes, as it is in most parts of the country. Counties depend very heavily for their ability to provide their basic government services on PILT funding. It's an offset to help offset the fact that counties can't tax federal land. There are a few problems with it. One of them is that PILT is drastically underfunded. Counties receive pennies on the dollar compared to what they would receive if they could tax that land, even if they just taxed it at an average rate or even near the low end of the rate system that they have. So this isn't right in the first place, that we have to worry about PILT. We ought to be able to receive a rough tax equivalent value for that land if the federal government's going to own it. When I make this point, federal land managers often tell me, well, you're very blessed in Utah that we have a lot of people who like to recreate on that land. All Americans, including Utahns, benefit from the fact that we have those lands. Well, that's true. But if this is a national benefit, then the burden ought not be focused disproportionately on public land jurisdictions. And currently it is. So we need PILT, we need it to be stable, and we need it to be fully funded to the point that it's providing a rough tax equivalent. So a few weeks ago, as Congress was working its way through some appropriations measures, I learned that funding for PILT, which had previously for about 5 years been considered mandatory spending, was taken out of the appropriations bill, the omnibus. And the decision was made to put it in with what's become known as the Farm Bill. There was a very simple reason why that was done, and it was a reason that quickly filtered its way over to me. And the reason was there was a lot of concern among supporters of the Farm Bill that because the drafters of the Farm Bill had not implemented basically any of the significant reforms they had promised, that they were not going to have enough votes to pass it, that a lot of Western state senators and representatives were going to vote against it. And they said, we've got to have something to make sure that this happens. We've got to buy some more votes. So they took it out of the appropriations measure and they put it into the Farm Bill, trying to obscure the fact that this Farm Bill, first of all, was mostly not about agriculture. 80% of it was about food stamps, SNAP, with no significant reforms, even though those reforms had been promised for a long time, no significant reforms by way of work requirements or other things to help ease the path back to full employment of Americans who rely on that program. The other 20% of it consisted mostly of agricultural programs, but it didn't contain the significant reforms that many had demanded. We're still paying an enormous amount of money for people to not plant their land, to not grow anything on their farm. There was a reform that had initially been in the Farm Bill that would have limited how much income someone can have while still receiving a federally subsidized crop insurance plan. Now, they even removed that so that people can make over $750,000 a year and still receive federally subsidized crop insurance. None of those reforms took place, and because of that, they attached PILT to it, trying to buy a few votes. They bought votes. But this is the problem. Number one, we cannot allow PILT to become a game piece in a political game. And that's what happened here. It was used as a game piece in a political game in order to buy a few votes. Number two, although it funded everything else in the Farm Bill for 5 years, it funded PILT for only 1 year, meaning that at the end of that 1 year, we're going to find ourselves with PILT being orphaned anyway, and we're going to have to find some other way to do it. I think the solution has got to be to start focusing on PILT as a standalone. Maybe it will or maybe it won't be passed as a standalone, but if we focus on it as a standalone, we can get enough public attention brought to it and on the fact that it needs to be fully funded, and I'm working on legislation to do both of those things. Let me say one final thing about this, because this is indicative of a broader problem in Washington. Too often in Washington, what passes for compromise is actually collusion, where a lot of people will get together and rather than finding a mutually agreeable, mutually beneficial outcome, they will collude, meaning they'll come up with a solution that's harmful to others, but beneficial to those who are colluding. And that's what happened here. That's what happens in far too many instances where 1,000-page pieces of legislation spending $1 trillion, like the Farm Bill, are put before Congress hours before they have to be voted on. And those bills get voted on and they get passed without anyone reading it. This is not bipartisan. This is not cooperative. This is collusion. and it's wrong, and I voted against it, and I wouldn't do it again. But we've got to fix PILT, and I will continue to fight in that direction.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Ellison.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Senator Lee, for coming in and spending some time with us today. I have two quick questions. Should I say maybe two perceived injustices done to this body by your office. The first one's understandable. It was the plucking of Representative Derek Brown from this body to be your deputy state director. It's very understandable. It's our body is he's greatly missed, but I'm sure your office is that much better off for that move. The second is of a more serious nature. The last two sessions, this body has passed HJR 14 and HJR 4 on an almost unanimous basis, which urges Congress to pass the Marketplace Fairness Act and restore states' rights. It's a very strong states' rights bill and give us the authority to dictate our taxing authority. The bill passed the Senate on a bipartisan, greater than supermajority basis. I believe we're the only state in the nation that passed resolutions back-to-back urging Congress to pass this. And sadly, we're also the only state in the nation where both of our senators didn't support that legislation. I'm just curious what you feel is so wrong with those that it would override the will of this body for 2 years running.
Thank you, Representative. I'm happy to address both of those. And I do take seriously my relationship with the legislature. And I feel that because the Senate was created to provide representation to states, I owe a special obligation to keep in touch with you and to answer questions like these. First of all, with regard to Derek Brown, I'm sorry, but he's just awesome. And I invited him to join my staff as my state director and deputy chief of staff, and I was elated when he accepted. And I know his loss to this body was substantial. His contribution to my office, nonetheless, is very, very much appreciated, and deeply in your debt on that front. With respect to the Marketplace Fairness Act, let me tell you why I can't support that. There are two constitutional issues that come up whenever we start talking about one state taxing something that was sold in another state and then shipped to another state. One of them relates to the Dormant Commerce Clause, which says basically that one state can't extend its taxing power into another state out of its own jurisdiction without permission from Congress. That part can be lifted by Congress. There's another part that relates to the Due Process Clause. There's a longstanding line of precedent that talks about this, that talks about the fact that in the absence of minimum contacts in the state where the tax is imposed, a different state may not tax there. In other words, State A has no ability to impose a tax on a sale that took place in State B unless the manufacturer operating in State B has some kind of minimum contacts with State A such that it can be said to have purposely availed itself of the benefits of doing business there. So I understand the problem that this is trying to address. I do think that there are other ways that that problem can be addressed, and I'd be happy to discuss that with you and with others who may be interested. But this bill doesn't do that. And although the Marketplace Fairness Act does address the dormant commerce end of the equation, it does not address and cannot resolve the due process problem inherent in that.
Thank you. Hopefully you can help us find a solution.
Thank you.
Representative Stannard.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Senator Lee, for being here with us today. You addressed this a little bit in your opening comments, but I'm curious to go a little bit more into it. About a month ago, the Salt Lake Tribune editorial board issued an editorial titled, "Senator Lee Makes a Bipartisan Turn." And some parts of it that I think might be surprising to some. They addressed a couple things. One was talking about recent speeches that you've given in various venues around the country about more focusing on finding common goals and less on ideological purity. They also, their quote also saying that there is substance to the shift, as they called it. They addressed specifically talking about sentencing reform and government snooping, as you called it, through the NSA, that both predated the budget debates as as well as the government shutdown, as well as also survived those and has continued past throughout those movements. And the end quote from that editorial was, "But if he no longer expects people with differing views to abandon their principles, then he has learned something, and we can learn from him." The whole article as a whole was, I thought it was very positive, but it had an interesting take. But I'm just curious to get your thoughts onto what has led to that, what's changed or not changed. And how do you balance that when you get down to some of the very serious issues we face today that it seems like there's no ability to have a bipartisan discussion or agreement on those things versus those that we can? Just like some comments from that.
Sure. So first of all, there is an impression created by some of the news media that suggests that Democrats and Republicans in Congress, including in the Senate, just are constantly at each other's throats. They just hate each other. They can't ever work together. There's no bipartisanship. It really isn't accurate. We have things that are passed with substantial bipartisan support all the time. And it does happen frequently. There are instances where there is deep-rooted disagreement, and there are areas where bipartisanship is less common. One of the things that I've attempted to do, particularly since the 2012 election cycle ended and we discovered that, we were going to have at least another 2 years in which Republicans were in the minority and not in control of the White House for another 4 years after that election, was the fact that there have got to be ways that, consistent with my conservative principles, we can find things that will benefit people, to lift barriers, to pave the paths of laudable pursuit. And so I started looking for some of those ways. It was interesting. A few months ago, I think it was in August, I had been fairly critical of the president for issuing his executive order on July 2nd of 2013, suspending the employer mandate of the Affordable Care Act while leaving the individual mandate in place. And I was driving with my family through Burley, Idaho, as we were on our way to a family reunion. And I got a phone call from my assistant in Washington who said, "Are you available for a phone call? The president wants to speak with you." And I said, "Okay, I meet with a lot of presidents of a lot of organizations. The president of what?" She said, "Well, it's the president of the United States." So I immediately thought, oh, no, gosh, he's calling to take me out to the woodshed for criticizing his executive order. I was pleasantly surprised, however, when he was just calling to tell me that he agreed with my sentencing reform bill that I've introduced with Senator Dick Durbin, who's the Democratic whip in the Senate, the majority whip. And he just called to tell me that he really liked it. He'd be supporting it. There are a lot of areas where we can agree, especially when we agree on some very basic points that I think most of us can get behind, which is that in many instances the federal government is harming people. In many instances the federal government is making life more difficult for those who need us, need our help, or at least need our non-interference more than anyone else, and that is the poor and the middle class. And there are things that we can do to alleviate those burdens that we're placing on them, and this is part of that effort.
We have one more. Representative Seelig.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Welcome, Senator.
Thank you.
I would like to ask you about the Bipartisan Women, Peace, and Security Act that was introduced into your body on January 16th, 2014. I realize that you've got a lot to go through, and that may not be top of mind for you. It is for me, and I would really appreciate it if you could take a look at it. It is a tool that would allow the United States to promote the critical role of women in peace building and conflict resolution across the globe in countries that are war-torn, countries that we're involved in, that we're spending money in, that we're losing lives in. And one such country would be Afghanistan. So when we pull out from a military perspective, we do, as you well know, have institutions and processes still there that help rebuild. It would be helpful if women could have a seat at those tables. Typically, I'm sure also as you know, in several of those places, women are not allowed to participate politically and are often killed in horrible ways, and women and girls. We need new solutions in these areas. We need them because the same insane cycle of warfare, death, and destruction does not do justice to our tax-paying dollars, and it doesn't help create a space where we can all thrive. Also, having women at the table will help get humanitarian aid to women and girls when it is needed. It is a bipartisan bill, a lovely opportunity for you to make a statement related to the other side of the aisle, and I would really appreciate it if you could take a look at it and consider to co-sponsor it. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Seelig. And I have not seen that bill yet. Can you give me the name and the number of the bill again? I'll have a look at it.
The Women, Peace, and Security Act. The number is 1942, and it was introduced on the 16th of January, 2014.
Great. I will have a look. Thank you very much.
Thank you.